There is a knot that does not loosen with logic. It appears on ordinary mornings when the coffee is warm, the house is tidy, and nothing obvious is wrong. It arrives in the pauses between harmless sentences and the mechanical kiss at the door, in the way laughter lands with the dullness of a rehearsed line. A woman feels it before she can name it. Not a text message, not a lipstick stain, not even a provable lie, just a thinning of presence, a dimming of light, a silence where warmth used to live. Infidelity rarely begins with a body. It begins when the gaze no longer lingers, when good morning loses its music, when the oxygen of curiosity leaves a room that still looks clean. The betrayal starts in the invisible, in a retreat of attention, in the quiet decision to stop choosing the relationship while keeping the routine alive. The body stays, the soul looks for an exit. What hurts first is not the thought of another person, but the realization that the person across from you has already stepped somewhere you can't follow. Carl Jung observed that people will do almost anything to avoid facing their own souls. That avoidance often wears the costume of busyness and stress, but its essence is flight away from boredom, away from responsibility, away from the shadow that contains frustration, vanity, fear, and hunger for validation. When a man refuses to wrestle with that shadow, he hunts for anesthesia in admiration, novelty, or secret attention. It is not love he seeks, it is temporary relief from the ache of himself. The tragedy is that the woman who loves him senses the withdrawal long before the story has evidence. She feels how his questions turn superficial, how his replies become thin, how he stops checking that she made it home safe even as he expects her steadiness to remain. The asymmetry is small at first, a skipped follow-up, a half-hearted smile, yet the imbalance compounds until the relationship lists to one side, heavy with her giving and hollow with his absence. When she gently names what she feels, the dance of distortion can begin. Her intuition is treated as a malfunction instead of a message. She is told she is exaggerating, dramatic, paranoid, that the knots in her stomach prove something about her and nothing about the relationship. This is how manipulation enters without raising its voice. What was once a reliable inner compass is rebranded as a liability. The woman learns to second-guess sensation, to distrust the very instrument that has kept her safe. The house remains in order. The heart loses its bearings. This is the loneliest stage. There is no scandal to point to, no public wound to dress, only a daily erosion of intimacy that does not bleed but empties. The bed often tells the truth no one wants to say out loud. Intimacy grows cold or turns strangely theatrical, as if passion could be staged to cover absence, as if a sudden blaze could make everyone forget that the firewood has been damp for months. Touch loses tenderness, presence fractures even as bodies meet. Meanwhile, a performance continues in daylight. There is talk of fatigue deadlines, a mind elsewhere, a phone that migrates from countertop to pocket to bathroom, with the vigilance reserved for fragile artifacts. The phone is not the point. The secrecy is. Every new password is another closed door. Every overreaction to an innocent question is an admission disguised as outrage. Where there is nothing to hide, curiosity meets calm. Where a parallel life is beginning, curiosity is treated as a crime. Then the story advances through petty battles, not because the relationship is inherently combative, but because conflict provides a rationale for distance. Suddenly, a forgotten errand proves deep incompatibility. A tone becomes a referendum on character. Projection blooms. The one who is withdrawing accuses the one who notices of being too much. If he can cast her as suspicious, controlling, ungrateful, he can escape the task of facing himself in the shadow he won't acknowledge, writes the script. Plans shift subtly from we to I. Travel dreams lose their plural. Her name disappears from the future tense. She feels herself fading from a life she is still faithfully watering. Gaslighting is the word we give to the corrosion of self-trust. It does not always shout. Often it sighs, shrugs, or makes a joke at just the right moment to make a woman swallow her clarity. You're imagining things. You're always negative. You can't let anything go. The message under every line is the same: do not believe yourself. Jung would say, enlightenment does not come by imagining light, but by making darkness conscious. Yet in this stage, darkness is precisely what the woman is trained not to name. She learns to keep the peace by abandoning herself. She cries in private and apologizes for tears. She lowers her voice and calls it maturity. If you have ever lived this, you recognize the diagram without needing names or dates. The harm is not exclusively in betrayal as an act. It is in the long prelude where devotion is taken for granted, where presence is mimed, where truth is evaded, where the surface remains presentable while the foundation loosens with each unspoken reality. The woman senses that she is lonelier with him than without him. That is the ache she cannot explain at dinner, the grief that has no headline. And yet the soul keeps whispering something is broken. The whisper is not paranoia, it is perception. The body knows before the mind agrees. The question is not whether she can produce evidence, but whether she will honor what she already knows. What begins as unease soon matures into exhaustion. A woman can live months, even years, inside that quiet dissonance, half believing her intuition, half surrendering to doubt. Each time she questions the hollow in his eyes, she finds herself apologizing for noticing. He withdraws behind walls of irony and detachment, and she fills the silence with explanations meant to protect the love that once felt safe. But love cannot thrive on imagination alone. You can water a flower after it has died, but it will not bloom from memory. The hardest truth is realizing that affection without presence is only habit, and habit without honesty becomes a kind of slow mourning disguised as daily life. Still she tries. She rearranges herself, softens her tone, picks her words carefully so he won't retreat further. She becomes smaller to keep him comfortable, mistaking peace for the absence of argument. But indifference is not peace, it is emotional winter. The warmth that once animated their laughter now flickers like a dying flame that both are pretending to ignore. He says he's tired, overwhelmed, stressed, and she believes it because the alternative is too painful, that he has already stepped out of their shared world while leaving his body behind. So she waits, for the tenderness to return, for a conversation that will explain everything, for the day his eyes remember how to see her. Waiting becomes its own kind of prison. As days pass, disconnection takes new shapes, the phone that never leaves his hand, the locked screen turned face down, the sudden irritation when she asks something simple. He guards ordinary privacy as if it were a vault, and when she wonders aloud, he deflects with practiced offense. "You don't trust me anymore. Can't I have space?" His tone transforms concern into accusation until she begins to fear her own questions. But the truth is, intimacy cannot survive where transparency is treated like trespass. What he calls space is often a sanctuary for avoidance, a place where his secret dissatisfaction can breathe without accountability. She feels it in the air. His energy no longer rests in the home they built. His laughter returns lighter when he's talking to someone else, his silence heavier when he's with her. Then come the arguments over nothing, the meaningless sparks that mask a deeper intention. He picks fights about a misplaced key, a tone of voice, a forgotten errand. The fight is not about those things, it's about creating distance. If he paints her as unreasonable, he can justify his withdrawal. He accuses her of the very things he is doing, coldness, detachment, self-absorption, and in that mirror of distortion he absolves himself. Each conflict becomes evidence that the relationship is too difficult, that she makes everything dramatic, that they've simply grown apart. The script writes itself. She becomes the problem. He becomes the victim of her emotions. It is projection turned into narrative, and she, desperate to save what remains, tries even harder to be understanding, not realizing that her understanding is the soil where manipulation grows. In the shadows of these small betrayals, emotional abuse flourishes precisely because it leaves no visible bruises. He doesn't shout, he sighs. He doesn't insult, he jokes. He doesn't forbid, he ignores. His calm becomes a weapon sharper than anger. Each dismissal chips away at her sense of reality. She wonders whether her pain is even valid, whether love inevitably dulls like this. When friends ask how things are, she smiles and says, "Fine, because how can you explain an absence? How do you name a ghost that still sets the table and says, 'Good night'?" Gaslighting doesn't erase reality. It replaces it with fog. And soon she cannot tell if she's living in truth or inside someone else's story of who she is supposed to be. Carl Jung wrote that what we resist persists. The harder she tries to pretend nothing is wrong, the more the truth presses against her ribs. The body keeps score. Her stomach knots at his touch. Her sleep becomes restless. Her laughter sounds borrowed. She begins to understand that the relationship is not dying suddenly, but decaying slowly the way fruit spoils from the inside before the skin shows. Emotional absence is the earliest form of goodbye. It's the moment when one partner stops turning toward the other and starts turning inward, or worse, outward. When he stops confiding, stops dreaming aloud, stops including her in the architecture of his future, the connection withers invisibly, leaving her holding a love that no longer has a recipient. It is then that she faces the most dangerous illusion that if she just loves harder, she can bring him back. But love cannot resurrect someone who is already left emotionally. You cannot bargain with indifference. You cannot negotiate presence. A relationship sustained only by one person's effort eventually collapses under its own imbalance. The woman begins to see that her devotion, though pure, has become the fuel for her own depletion. Loving him has turned into losing herself, and that realization, though painful, is the first spark of awakening. Awakening does not come in a single flash. It arrives in fragments like dawn creeping through half-drawn curtains. One morning she realizes she hasn't laughed freely in months. Another day she notices how carefully she edits herself before speaking. The silence that used to feel peaceful now hums with unease. She scrolls through old photos and sees the difference in her own eyes. The woman who once glowed with safety now carries the cautious look of someone always bracing for impact. She begins to understand that this is not partnership anymore. It's performance. She has been cast in the role of the understanding one, the forgiving one, the endlessly patient one. But patience has turned into paralysis. What she called loyalty has become self-abandonment. Still, she clings to memories because the present offers no comfort. The mind bargains. Maybe it's just a phase, maybe when work slows down, maybe when the kids grow older. The heart, however, knows that disconnection isn't seasonal. It's a choice made repeatedly in silence. The man beside her may not have confessed or left, but his spirit has already crossed a border she can't follow. Infidelity doesn't always have a face or a name. Sometimes it's just the absence of curiosity, the apathy in small talk, the way affection becomes obligation. It is the gradual retreat of emotional investment until only habit remains. She senses this every time he says "I love you" with the flatness of routine. She feels it when his phone lights up and he turns it away, when his laughter sounds different with others, lighter, unguarded. It is not the presence of another woman that destroys her, it's the absence of the man he once was. When she dares to confront him, the pattern repeats. Deflection, denial, inversion. You're imagining things. You always think the worst. You've become impossible. He twists concern into accusation, pain into drama. The more she tries to explain, the more unreasonable she appears. This is how emotional gaslighting completes its circle, by making her believe she's the one who needs fixing. Slowly, she stops asking, stops expressing, stops existing fully. She walks on eggshells in her own home, afraid of sounding needy or wrong. The relationship becomes a quiet dictatorship ruled by avoidance, and yet outwardly everything seems normal. The photos still hang, the dinners still happen, the neighbors still wave hello. No one suspects that she's living beside an emotional ghost. The cruelty of this stage is its invisibility. There's no public scene, no dramatic breakup, just a steady erasure of joy. She might catch herself apologizing for crying, for feeling, for wanting connection. Every apology deepens the wound. Carl Jung once said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Her darkness now is not him. It's the part of herself that settled for less, the part that confused endurance with love. And when she finally faces it, something within begins to shift. Awareness is painful, but it is also sacred. It's the soul's way of saying enough. She starts reclaiming small territories, going for walks alone, turning her phone off, sitting with her own thoughts without trying to explain them away. The silence that used to terrify her now feels almost clean. She begins to hear her intuition again, not the anxious voice of fear, but the steady whisper of truth. It tells her what she has long resisted, that she cannot fix a bond by herself, that no amount of goodness can compensate for another's absence, that staying in a dying relationship is a form of self-betrayal. She realizes that healing will not come from convincing him to return, but from choosing herself after years of neglect. The shift is subtle at first. She stops trying to read his moods. She no longer chases half-hearted affection. She starts investing that energy inward reading, writing, breathing, remembering who she was before she began shrinking. The distance between them, once unbearable, becomes a space where she rediscovers her own voice. She no longer begs for clarity because she already has it. The man she loved might still share her address, but not her life. And though accepting that truth hurts, it also liberates her from the endless loop of hoping and hurting. Awareness brings grief, but also strength. She begins to see patterns not just in him, but in herself. The way she tolerated small disrespect, the way she silenced intuition to preserve peace. None of it was weakness. It was love, misdirected empathy overextended. Now, with every boundary she sets, she gathers the scattered pieces of her dignity. Her reflection changes. The eyes that once pleaded now hold quiet conviction. She's not hardened, she's clear. She finally understands that love without reciprocity isn't love, it's charity. And the heart, though infinite in capacity, was never meant to live on crumbs. Clarity does not erase pain, but it transforms it. Where confusion once lived, understanding begins to root. The woman now sees that what she mistook for love was often fear. Fear of loss, of loneliness, of being misunderstood. But loneliness within a relationship is a sharper solitude than any she will ever face alone. It is the ache of lying next to someone whose heart is elsewhere, of speaking to a body whose soul has already left. And yet this realization doesn't break her, it begins to unbind her. She learns that acceptance is not surrender. It's the end of resistance to what is already true. She starts remembering the small betrayals she once excused, the forgotten birthdays. The distracted silences, the way his empathy evaporated the moment she expressed her pain. These memories no longer exist to torture her. They serve as evidence of her awakening. Each recollection becomes a thread she pulls gently from the tangled fabric of denial. Beneath it all, she finds herself the woman who once believed that love meant endurance, that forgiveness meant silence, that devotion meant staying no matter what. Now, she understands that staying too long in a place where your soul is unseen is its own kind of disappearance. The hardest part is forgiving herself not for loving, but for dimming her light to keep someone else comfortable. She begins to grieve not just the relationship, but the version of herself who tolerated so much in the name of hope. But this grief is holy. It is the labor of rebirth. Healing doesn't happen in a single act of courage. It happens in daily choices, each time she refuses to chase, each time she tells the truth instead of pretending, each time she chooses quiet honesty over desperate harmony. And slowly, the silence that once suffocated her becomes space for her own voice to return. She starts seeing how his betrayal was never really about her. It was about his inability to face himself, his shadow, his emptiness. Jung called it projection, the act of exiling our unhealed parts by seeing them in others. Her partner ran from his own void and tried to fill it with distraction, validation, or control. It was never her job to heal that for him. Love may hold compassion, but it cannot substitute self-awareness. To love someone who refuses to meet their own soul is to spend your life translating silence into meaning. She finally stops translating. She lets the silence speak for what it is, absence. There are moments when nostalgia still pulls at her, a scent, a song, a photograph. For a brief second, she misses the illusion of what they once were. But memory is not invitation. It is reminder. She can miss the warmth without reopening the wound, because now she knows that not every love story is meant to last. Some exist to awaken us, to break the illusions we built around our worth. What once felt like tragedy now feels like instruction, a lesson in discernment, in boundaries, in self-respect. Every heartbreak leaves behind the blueprint of what we will no longer accept. Her intuition, once silenced, now becomes her guide. It no longer trembles. It speaks with authority. She trusts it when it whispers, "This doesn't feel right. You deserve more. Walk away." The same instinct that once warned her of loss now leads her back to herself. Because intuition is not paranoia, it's wisdom learned through pain. It's the language of the soul, reminding her that love should expand her, not confine her. She understands now that the truth, no matter how harsh, is always kinder than self-deception. And though truth costs her the relationship, it gives her back her freedom. In that freedom, she begins to rebuild not by seeking replacement, but by returning home inward. She learns to enjoy her own company again, to fill silence with music of her own choosing, to find peace in solitude instead of fear. She starts doing the small things she once postponed, reading at night, taking long walks, rediscovering laughter that is hers alone. Every act of self-care becomes an act of reclamation. Slowly she realizes she was never truly waiting for him to return. She was waiting for herself. And now she's here, not the same, not untouched, but awake. Awakening reshapes everything. The world does not change overnight, but her perception does. The noise that once distracted her now feels irrelevant. The drama that once kept her tangled now appears almost transparent. She understands now that closure does not come from his apology or explanation. It comes from her acceptance of what is. The story no longer needs to be rewritten. It only needs to be released. She stops chasing understanding from someone incapable of giving it and begins to seek it within herself. What she finds there is not bitterness, but clarity, not revenge, but peace. There are days when the emptiness still echoes, but now it feels like space instead of loss. Where guilt once lived, gratitude begins to grow, the quiet gratitude of survival, of rediscovering strength she didn't know she had. She begins to see that what looked like breaking was really the beginning of becoming. She has walked through the fire of emotional abandonment and come out more honest, more grounded, more whole. The pain didn't destroy her. It refined her. What remains is not the version of her that begged to be loved, but the one who knows she is love itself. She forgives not to excuse him, but to free herself from the emotional tether that kept her bound to his shadow. She understands that forgiveness is not a reunion. It's a release. It's saying, I no longer carry what you refuse to face. Jung wrote that freedom doesn't come when we change others, but when we stop reacting to their shadow. That's what she's done. She no longer mirrors his avoidance, no longer absorbs his silence. Instead, she meets herself fully, including the parts that once scared her, the anger, the grief, the longing. She sees now that these emotions were never weakness. They were evidence of how deeply she could feel, how fully she could love. With each passing day, her relationship with solitude transforms from fear to friendship. She starts noticing beauty again, the way sunlight slips through curtains, the sound of rain on her window, the small joys she used to overlook while trying to fix what was never hers to fix. Life becomes quieter, simpler, but fuller. She no longer measures her worth by someone else's attention. Her validation comes from her alignment with truth. She is no longer waiting to be chosen, she is choosing herself. And in that choice, she opens the door to a new kind of love, one that is not born from need but from wholeness. If she ever loves again, it will be with boundaries, not walls, with clarity, not fear. She will recognize that love is not proven by how much pain one can endure, but by how freely two souls can meet in honesty. She will know that peace is more precious than attachment, and that the right person will never make her question her worth. The woman who once begged for connection now knows that real love begins where self-abandonment ends. So she steps forward, not with triumph, but with serenity. She carries the lessons like lanterns, that intuition is sacred, that silence can be truth, that endings can be beginnings. Her story is not one of loss, but of liberation. Because every woman who finally listens to her inner voice is not breaking down, she is breaking open. She is becoming the woman who no longer waits for permission to be free. If this story spoke to you, you've ever felt that quiet ache of emotional distance or found your strength in the aftermath, remember to share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me what truth did your soul whisper before your mind was ready to hear it. Your story might help someone else wake up too.